So, since you were last here, I've finished off the camouflage. You can see the areas quite clearly where it's been darkened to make it look like fresh paint, and especially on the underside here. I've touched in some of the chipping on the wing roots, and there's various other small details have been painted, leading edges of the wings, things like that. And then yesterday it received an overall very thin coat of Mr. Colour GX112, which is the gloss clear. It's received a thin coat of it, very heavily thinned, about probably about 80% thinner to 20% actual varnish. I'm not looking for a super high gloss coat. All I'm looking for is to smooth the paint out, give it a bit of protection for what's to come, and it just makes applying decals easier. They slide better over a smooth surface than they do a flat surface. And it's this complete thing took maybe 5 minutes to put a quick coat of varnish over, then leave it overnight to dry. We're here now. I've given it a very light polish with a piece of Trizact. Nothing to, I mean, it's literally just that, and it's just knocking the tops off of any roughness in any areas, and is left with this quite smooth paint finish. Whilst that's been going on, I've also been painting other details like the undercarriage legs, the wheels here, the prop there, and this little there's the exhausts are in there, and that's just so that I can do all of the washing and stuff at the same time. All of this has also received a coat of that gloss just to smooth it out, and it, like I say, it makes applying decals easy, but it also makes applying a wash, and more importantly removing excess wash, more easily. Now, in terms of the wash, we're ready to apply the wash now, and there are so many different kinds of washes out there. There's acrylic washes. I have the full range of Tamiya's enamel washes, and various assorted other MIG and ammo washes and stuff like that. But I always come back to Winsor & Newton oil paints. So a couple of hours ago I put some raw umber, Payne's grey and white oil on this piece of cardboard, just to let the excess linseed oil wick away, and then I'm just going to use some odourless thinner. Whilst this is a Bob Ross bottle, it's not actually Bob Ross's thinner in there, because he's been gone 30 years and it would have evaporated by now. Sorry, bad joke, but it's just any odourless thinner, and all I'm going to do is pop a little bit of thinner into this little beaker here, then pick up a mixing brush. And what I like to do most of the time, a good part of my panel line washes will be a mixture of Payne's grey and raw umber, and what that gives me is a kind of a dirty grey browny sort of colour. If any of you have used the colour that various people do as Starship Filth, MIG do as Starship Filth, it's kind of in that ballpark. A little bit darker maybe, so sometimes I'll add a dash of white to it just to grey it up a tiny little bit, and give it a good thorough mix into there. I'm using an old brush here, but it's been cut down, and the thing about that is it gives it quite a it makes it quite a stiff brush, which makes it good for really working this oil paint into the thinner. I don't want a super thin mix because I want it to run into the panel detail, and so hopefully you can see what I've got here is a kind of dirty grey brown colour, which I tend to think it looks pretty much what I want for an overall wash. I will be using other bits and bobs from other manufacturers and enamels and stuff as we go for different bits of the model, but for the overall airframe, just bring you in a little bit. Okay, and this is just a case I'm using. This is quite a long brush, and that just means it holds a lot of thinner, a lot of the wash. And all I'm going to do is, I'm not being too careful with it. I have in the past, and I still do sometimes, apply an overall, just like a sludgy wash, in spite of my mate Jen's objections to doing it that way. I sometimes do. So all I'm going to do is just work around this. Just, you know, generally capillary action will work a lot of the time, but it can just be a little bit of a you know, a risk. Sometimes it won't take how you want it, and the capillary action won't take it as far along as you thought it was going to go. So it just means I find doing it this way painting along every major panel line and piece of detail, it still leaves less to remove than if you apply a sludge wash, but it just means I'm happy that it's overall the detail. So that's the underside grey that's done there. I'm just going to let that dry. But I do want to do the top sides, and I think the top sides could do with being a little bit darker. So I'm just going to add another little hit of the Payne's grey to my mixture here, just to darken it down even more. And this is one of the things, it's, I don't always do it, but you can, you know, feel free to adjust the depth of colour or the actual colour itself depending on which bit of the model you're painting. So yeah, I wanted that a bit darker, and that's a bit darker. One of the other things while we're here is people have sometimes said, why do I apply the wash before I apply decals and things like that? Because if you look at most people will apply the decals and then apply the washes. I just find it easier to apply the wash before any decals or anything go on, because it just I'm putting it onto a surface without any decal film or anything like that on. There's nothing for it to run up against, creating stains around decals or anything like that. And then what I'll do is I'll just, once I've finished this and all the decals are bedded in and all the panel detail is, you know, visible, and as the decals have been cut to allow the panel detail to show if necessary and stuff like that, is I'll just make up a thicker mixture of the base paint and run it along those little portions of the model where the decals are, and just touch them in very, very gently. Again, it's enough if I can't stress too much really. It's personal preference. Make your own mind up how you want to do it and see if it works for you. And don't be and the other thing is, don't feel bound by a technique that you may be using. Don't feel like it's like for instance, I do a lot of masking and spraying of markings, and you know, it's easy for that to become just your default method, and you don't think you can step outside of that method. You have to do it once you started doing it. But I'm going to use all the decals on this kit. One, because it's a demonstration build for the manufacturer, so I want to use the decals to show what they're like. And two, because I want to. You know, something becomes the norm and you feel unable to break away from that, and you feel obliged to sort of continue with what you think is your norm. Rivets are another aspect of that. I sometimes rivet models and I sometimes don't. And there's no rhyme or reason for that. It can be literally just what I'm feeling like on the day. It doesn't mean your model is going to look terrible if you don't do something you've got used to doing. It just means it's going to look slightly different, and that is fine. So some of the stuff, like the wheelbase, I do want to put some of this wash into, but I don't want it to be quite as stark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it with some more of this low odor thinner, and then I'm just gonna, so that is quite a lot thinner and results in quite a significantly more translucent coat, which means it will travel and pull very much more efficiently on this one. And won't be nearly as difficult to clean up the excess, because these can be quite awkward little areas to get into. So I'm just generally applying it here to areas like that. So when this is dry but not yet hardened off, as in all the thinners evaporated, what you find is that I can go in with just some towel, in this case just some blue towel, and the excess will come away from the panels. Very quickly. And if you find it's pulled up in areas and stuff like that that are difficult to get to, use a cotton bud, Q-tip, whatever you call it in your part of the world, and that will allow you to get into corners, and this will remain sort of fairly easily workable for quite some time. So yeah, there's the wash completely done. I've removed as much as much of the excess as I can at this point. As you can see, it was a fairly quick operation. So what will happen now? So what will happen now is we'll allow this some time for that oil paint to dry. And there's always little areas like this where you can see little bits that you missed, so keep an eye out for them. So we'll let that dry off for a while, and then we can start looking at applying the decals to this model. Okay, so with all that done, the model has been just given a quick polish over with some Trizact and stuff, and we're now basically ready for markings. Things like the prop are well on the way. They've been, we're weathering that. A little box here with a few of the little sub-assemblies, undercarriage parts and things in there. So we're now basically ready to move on to applying the markings to this. Now I had planned initially to use as much masking and spraying as I could for the markings. It's how I tend to do a lot of my models these days. I have the software and the silhouette cutter to make my own masks, so I generally do that quite a lot. But thinking on it in retrospect, this is a kit for the manufacturer, being built for their display. So I decided that I was going to use I'm going to use as many of the kit decals as I can for this. That is made easy by the fact that the actual kit decal sheet included is just, it's superb. It's absolutely beautiful. It has been printed by cartograph, so in this day and age the quality of your markings is basically assured. So yeah, in this instance I'm going to use as many of the kit markings as possible. Now generally speaking, obviously if you get this as a full up kit, you will get that you'll have the instructions with you. I'm just going to fire up the my tablet here. Okay, we're back. So my tablet has now deigned to start. So we've got good instructions, including photographs here of the kit and the markings. So obviously we're going to use them, so I'm just going to put that off to one side and use that as my guide. In terms of equipment for putting stickers on, shall we say, so I've just got a pot of tepid water there, pair of decent scissors which I've just recently sharpened, so they are nicely sharp, knife, pick that up a sec, drop that, knife, decent tweezers, so scissors, knife, decent tweezers. I've got a little bag here full of cotton swabs, which are, these ones are really nice bamboo handled ones, so cotton swabs. Now I've got lots and lots of different setting and softening and setting solutions. This is the ammo stuff from MIG, the set, and the decal fix, which is the red is the softener. I'm going to really try, if you don't need to use any of this, don't use it. That's the best advice I can give. Quite often you'll find that you won't actually need to use it, and if you don't need to use it, don't use it. As it is, I might find myself using a bit of the softener as decals. The decals, especially on the especially on the underside here, we'll be going over quite a lot of detail. So yeah, applying decals. Let's apply a couple of decals and we'll take it from there. So all I'm going to do again, like I say, I've recently sharpened these scissors with an oil stone, so they are They are cutting quite beautifully at the moment. So the first decal we're going to apply here, first sticker decal transfer, is I'm going to apply this one here to the lower wing. So it's a lower wing star. So these are very nicely printed, including holes, cutouts for some of the detail, and a little part to put over that. So there's just a little tray I'm going to put it in. So all I'm going to do is just soak that decal in water for a few seconds. I'm going to put it on there, and then we'll just sort of keep fussing it until we know it's coming free. Applying markings is really a lot easier than a lot of people can tend to make a bit of a meal of this. So all I'm going to do is just make sure a bit of the water off of the back of the decal is on the surface. People use tweezers and all sorts. I just say, you've got a finger, use your finger to do that. Okay, now luckily, as long as you've got the painting right, this marking has got some holes in it for the shell ejection chutes and stuff, which almost sort of act as a locator in their own right. You know that when you know that the hole in the decal matches the ejector chute there, you're in the right place. It's that easy. So I'm just going to use a cotton swab, starting from the inside of the marking. And this is going to be, there's quite a lot of detail on here. Which is going to not be a massive challenge, but definitely isn't going to settle down as well as it might over a completely flat surface. So you can see there's on the other side there's a couple of little bulges behind the shell ejection chute there. Casing chute. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use a bit of blue tissue, because you want a bit of pressure on that really. I'm going to soak it in my tepid water, and then I'm just going to lay it over and apply pressure there. Now it's quite obvious really that this is not going to go down into there, so I'm just going to apply a little bit of slice a little gap there. I'm going to apply some of the MIG ammo decal, let's have a look, it's called Decal Fix, and I'm just going to apply a little bit of that into there for now, and around the areas where it's caused it to crease up a little bit. And then we're just going to start using this brush. As the liquid softens that, I'm just going to use a brush to tease the decal. The decal will kind of distort and start stretching a little bit. You do have to be careful here. You don't want to be too heavy-handed, or you can potentially tear, distort, or whatever else to the decal. But I can already see that is starting to go down. So it's really quite powerful solution, this. So what we don't want to be doing now is moving that decal. We've got it set exactly where we need it. Now it's just a case of getting it to conform. So again, I'm just going to use the cotton bud here, rolling it, and the decal is actually fixed quite firmly in place now, and I'm just going to roll it repeatedly over the surface to get it to bed in. Again, a lot of people say you shouldn't be touching the decal after you've applied softeners. Quite often, if you're careful, it's fine. Although I do have to stress you need to be careful. So I'm just going to apply a little bit more around these areas here. Like so. Again, don't ever use a completely dry cotton bud to do this, because what that will do is that will immediately soak up all the liquid, and the decal will end up sticking to the cotton bud, and you can end up pulling the decal away, tearing it, all that kind of stuff. So use a moistened cotton bud for this. And the other thing to say is, as distasteful as it may be to some people, one of the best things to moisten one of these cotton buds with when you're doing this is your own saliva. It's got proteins and stuff in it that just make it quite slippery and easy to work over the surface of the decal. And I think you'll find that most modelers with a lot of experience of doing this will say one thing about dipping it in water and all the rest, and they'll secretly be using their tongue to wet it, because the saliva is one of the best sort of moistening agents for doing this kind of work. So what's happened there is, with a few minutes of work, like I said, hopefully you can see those there, those little bulges over the over the shell ejector chute there, and on this side we've kind of almost perfectly flattened those, sort of moulded the marking around that without any real trouble. So I'm just going to apply a final tiny bit around those areas there, and once that's dry, there's a little bonus piece to go on over this exhaust here, this air exhaust sort of thing here. So again, we'll let that decal dry before we do that. We don't want to put decals over, a decal over a wet decal sort of thing. It's asking for trouble. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of tape to those are the areas that are constantly going to be in contact with my workbench as I work through the markings. So just applying a little bit of tape there will protect them. And that's one decal on, so we'll allow that to dry. So let's have a look at the top side marking, which is this very large star here. If you've got a number marking next to the decal on the sheet, try not to include that when you dip it in the water, because they don't tend to have any varnish or adhesive on them, these numbers, and they can float free and get stuck to the marking. So if you can trim that away before you dip it in water, I'd always recommend doing so. So let's have a look at this big marking here, which is, she's quite a large marking, that one. So I'm just gonna wet that. So that marking is now free, and let's slide it onto the wing there. And that is pretty much where that needs to go. So quite a large marking, but not the biggest on the planet. But I'm just doing exactly the same thing. It's just start inside the perimeter of the marking and then roll and push all the excess out, like so. And if your cotton bud becomes overly soaked in water or solution or anything, just get a new one. Don't bother trying to overuse one. Okay, these are pretty much the very definition of a consumable. And as that starts gripping, you can actually find yourself becoming a little bit more firm with your treatment. So again, on the door there's a lump which is obviously repeated on the other side. So again, I'm going to use a little bit of my softening solution around here. We'll give it a few seconds to take effect. And moisten the cotton bud. and then we'll just start gently teasing it down around that detail. Modern decals, like you know, the likes of Cartograph and stuff, are very, very amenable to this kind of operation. Just teasing it down there, working around it, teasing it down, then pushing away from the area where we've done that. Okay. It's almost down where we need it. Tiny little dab around the periphery of that marking. Like so. And pressure, and with that one is also in place and will continue to dry. So all we're going to do is leave that. So what I'm going to do is work over the model, applying these markings, just nothing special, just following the instructions. So we're back here at now. So the markings are on. What I did last night was I applied a coat of varnish over the markings, and I've lightly polished that varnish once it's dry to just blend the decals in a little bit. The undercarriage is all glued in. Very, very positive location on this. It was quite excellent. I've painted and popped the exhausts in, so what I want to do now is at some point I'm going to need to get some varnish on this. So I've chosen, although there's some details and stuff to go on, I'm going to get a coat of varnish on this now, settle all the colours in, and then we can see what we've got and work from there. Quite often a coat of varnish like that, that's sort of representative of the final coat, is a really, really good way of finding out where the model is currently. So we are going to do that, and for that I'm going to be using the VMS satin varnish, which dries basically it's more flat than satin, but it dries with a very slight sheen which just catches the light and keeps some sort of, makes the aircraft look alive, if you like. It doesn't sort of it doesn't kill the finish. I tend to find if a finish is too flat, it just sort of kills it. So that's just going to go straight through the airbrush. I've been using VMS for quite a few years now, and the thing that is difficult to convey to people is, in my experience, do not thin this. If it's having trouble going through the brush, get a brush with a bigger nozzle and increase the pressure. But do not thin it. If you thin it, even using their own thinners, I've found that it can affect the final finish, and you want it just you want the varnish to do the work, not how you apply it. So pick one of your other airbrushes like that. I've got a bunch of them, as you can see, but this one should be fine. Don't shake the bottle too much. It doesn't really need it or anything like that. And what you're going to do is apply one single wet coat You're not misting this on. Sometimes I'll sort of mist over what's left in the colour cup after I've finished applying the varnish, if there's any left. But for the base coat of varnish onto this, it needs to be going on wet, and really very wet. You don't want it so heavy that it's going to pool up, but you want it heavy enough that there's no doubt that the entire model is covered in varnish. So yeah, in line with that, let's see if I can find, it does mean that you're going to be pushing quite a lot of varnish through the brush. So it does require you to be a little bit sort of, a little bit careful that you don't end up with paint pooling. And I will decrease the pressure. And what I want is just it to be coming through the brush with no problems, atomizing okay, and that's good. So I've just brought it in a little bit closer so you can see what I'm doing, and hopefully catch a light. And like I say, this is going on wet. Doesn't matter about directions, you're not doing it in line with the airflow or anything, because this is just, like I say, and hopefully you can see that that's a really liberal wet coat, applied until just before it starts pooling. And use the light, catch the light to make sure the entire model is, the entire area you're spraying is absolutely covered. And it'll look pretty poor to start with, to be honest. This is just all part of the way this stuff goes on, but initially, because it's wet, any of the dust or anything will be magnified and look absolutely terrible. Just walk away and let it dry, and it'll be fine, I promise you. I don't think, it's not a miracle varnish. If you get it wrong, you'll still get it wrong. So it's not miracle varnish, but it's not far off it either. It is absolutely the best acrylic varnish I have ever used, and it's not all that close. So I'm just going around all these areas here, wheels, undercarriage, all that sort of stuff, making sure all that is covered as comprehensively as possible. And whereas you try and avoid a vortex normally in places like the wheel bays, it's going on so wet that it really, it's an acrylic and it's going on wet, there's really no opportunity for what you're spraying on to hit the model dry. So even that is not something to overly worry about. But you can see it's already starting to dry on the tail surfaces and things. So that's one wing done. That's again, just making sure that as much as possible you want to avoid having to go back and touch up the varnish, although you can, but it's not nearly as nice as just getting your first wet coat on. So I can already see that is starting to pull down as it dries, and just checking I've got enough there to do. So let's do the forward fuselage around the cockpit there. And with that, that can build up on the needle if you're not careful, so that's why you, once I start spraying an area, you'll see that I try to keep it going until the entire area is covered, so that it doesn't get a chance to pull up on the nozzle and create problems that way. So let's do that wing. Okay, just brought the camera out a tiny little bit. And if you do that, if you do have to stop and you start spraying, initiate the spray actually off the model, just so that any splatters caused by pulling on the needle will not hit the model. It's the advice I give, but I have been known to forget that, so again, as you see, just checking, bit along the trailing edge there, and like I say, it's just making sure the entirety of where I've sprayed varnish is wet. So let's give the prop a similarly liberal coat. I will be adding some extra weathering work on that prop. Again, like I say, this is just an initial coat. Just it sort of gives you a baseline to work from. So I think one of the most important things to say is that that's a 1/32 scale Spitfire, and that's how long it took me to get a coat of varnish on it. It really shouldn't be taking a long time. And so with what's left in there, and this is where it's okay to kind of mist on what's left onto the already wet surface, just to get rid of what's in the cup. And the final secret of applying this VMS is, once it's on the model, walk away and leave it. Don't fuss over it, okay? Honestly, you'll walk away for an hour, you'll come back and you'll go, you know, you'll be like, wow, this stuff just pulls down in the best way. So yeah, there we go. So welcome to this part. I'm afraid I did lose the audio for this part by dint of not plugging the microphone in, so all the stuff you can see me talking about here is not actually existing, I'm afraid. But this is about adding weathering, starting the weathering process using oil paints. And in this instance we're going to start off on the belly. You can see I've already started a little bit there. There's some stuff around the belly and the sides of the air intake and stuff like that. So we're going to use a variety of oils for this: Abteilungs, engine grease and Starship filth, and also the oil brusher Starship filth, which will be used for the majority of the sort of mucking the model up. So I'm just getting some of the oil brusher on a fine brush here. And the reason I'm doing this, I have used the brush that's on the oil brusher in the past, but this one's been damaged over time, so it's too clumsy to use. So just bring you in a little bit there, and then it's just a case of like around this area, the oil tank cover, just adding a few dabs behind the panel lines here. Just randomly adding a few dabs along those panel lines. Like so. So you can see there. So remember, this is over the acrylic varnish, so it's your paintwork is quite well protected. So I've got a little palette there. It's got some low odour enamel thinner in it, and I'm just going to use a fine brush. I'm just going to wet the brush, and then it's getting most of the thinner off. It's important to note that this thinner basically has no surface tension, so a lot of it will remain in the brush even when you think it hasn't. So when you go, you'll think the brush is more or less dry and go to dab it onto the model, and the model will get very thinner soaked very quickly. So just be careful and aware of that. But then all I'm doing here is just dabbing repeatedly over the area, trying to keep it entirely behind that panel line, because I want it to look like oil has leaked out from behind that panel line. And I'm just dabbing it and spreading that oil out. And I'll generally do a small bit of this at a time. The oil paint will start to the thinner in it will start to evaporate quite quickly. So it's do a little bit at a time, work on a little bit at a time, and complete it to more or less your satisfaction for the most part before moving on. And you just keep working it as long as you want, until you're happy with this stage of the job. So what this is doing is kind of dabbing it into the paint, spreading it out, and giving it a random appearance. So you see I'm moving on to the other panel line there, and I haven't actually done anything to the brush. I haven't re-wetted the brush or anything. There's still enough thinner and stuff in that brush to spread it out. But occasionally be aware of that, and maybe wash your brush out just to get rid of too much oil paint that will build up in the bristles, and will sort of stop you achieving a subtle effect, if you like. So just be aware of that as you go. And then I'm just going to use a little cotton bud, Q-tip, whatever you call it in your country, and I'm just gently dabbing over the areas I've worked there. This performs two tasks. This, first off, it will remove any of the excess thinner that may have built up on that surface, and also it just acts as a little, it just kind of blends that oil paint in a little bit more, makes it look less spotty. Not generally, I don't wipe it hugely back in line with the airframe. You can see me doing a few little swipes there back in line with the airflow. And then just moving on to other areas of the airframe, like so. These are the little access panels on the lower belly here, so I'm just adding a little dab of the oil paint behind each of those, and I believe that the term is stumping, but it's just kind of using that damp brush in a sort of dabbing motion. And it's also, don't use your best brushes for this, because this will take a toll on your brushes. Your brushes will have a significantly reduced life if you use them in this stabbing motion too much. You can see the edges of that brush there are already starting to fade out and get a little bit wild. So just be aware of that. And yeah, like I say, it's just moving over each little bit like this, where you think you want this this dirtying up to go. So that pattern there is almost creating a streak there on the underside, but it's not being pulled back, it's still being stumped in rather than pulled back in the direction of the airflow. So what will happen is, once that's been sort of stumped in to my satisfaction, I might leave that for a little while, and then I'll use a cotton bud or a wide brush or something just to gently pull it back in the direction of the airflow, just to make it look like it is subject to the airflow as such. And yeah, it's there's not really much more to say about this this stage. If you have a problem, if something goes horribly wrong, you can use a bit of thinner and remove the oil paint completely and have another go. It's one of the joys of using oil paints over this pretty durable acrylic finish, is that you can remove and have another go if you don't think it's going right. So what's going to happen is I'm going to proceed with this over the entire model, the top sides, and then when that's dry, we'll look at adding the kind of oil streaks, especially to the belly, where Spitfires did tend to get fairly messy. And if you think you're going to lift the previous paint, or you want to work quickly, a very thin coat of acrylic varnish over your weathering will seal it in and mean that it's not subject to the subsequent coat. So I've kind of dirtied up the airframe quite a bit now. Hopefully you can see that as it catches the light, with the with the Starship filth. Quite a lot of work on the underside, although tried to keep it a little bit subtle. And with that all dried, what I want to do is Spitfires, especially shall we say well used Spitfires, ended up with a lot of staining and oil streaking in this area here, coming back from the centre section and going with the airflow. It tended to be sort of thick, greasy, oily deposits and stuff. So I want to try and represent that if I can. So what I'm going to be using for that is this colour here, which is Abteilung's ABT 160, which is called engine grease. Now this is a kind of oily brown, black brown sort of colour. It looks really good. It's not flat, it's kind of quite a glossy colour, and it will dry that way, which is not really what I'm not really bothered about whether it's gloss or not, although it does tend to look good. So what I've done is I've put a little dab of it onto some card here. As before, I've got some odourless thinner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load a brush up quite heavily with it, okay, and then you can go like this. And really get it on there. And these deposits did go a long way back as well, so basically what I'm saying is don't be shy. Get really quite thick deposits, because we're going to be working this in just a second. So at this point, all I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up any kind of wider sort of brushes, and what you're looking to do is make this look like a streak of dirty sort of oil that's moving in the direction of the airflow. And this stuff is actually quite grippy, which normally the oils aren't, but it's not a huge issue. All I'm going to do is find a large flat brush like this. Just going to moisten it. So got this large flat brush like so. And that's going to pick up And then if you're thinking that looks like one big dark streak, now it does, but we can then move in with a smaller brush and turn it into actual streaks. And what you're doing here is that in part you're picking up excess paint where you perhaps don't want it, and you're also blending it a little bit. So then I'm going to use a cotton bud. Okay. I'm just rolling it over. And you see the cotton bud's picking up excess as well. Right. And basically all of these techniques are just do what you think looks right at the time. There's no right or wrong way. What I want to try and do as far as possible is stop these streaks running back into themselves. So I want there to be I want there to be very much defined. So whilst that area is pretty comprehensively messy now, at the same time there are 3 or 4 distinct streaks on there. And if you want to get it even, you can use a finer brush. So I might want to use a finer brush just to and I want to make it look like it's come from entirely behind this line here. So I'm just cleaning up the area ahead of that line with some with a moistened brush, just to make sure that it all looks like it's come from behind. So you see as that catches the light, that's actually quite glossy. So what we're going to do is I will let that dry off for a few hours, then I will weather it back in a bit more, stump it back in a bit more, and use some more oil paints to sort of add more streaks and stuff, but that's pretty much limited to just this area of the Spitfire. The belly's got very oily and dirty, so that's the effect we're trying to achieve. So at this point we're very much on the home stretch of the model. I've had a lot of oil paint weathering and dirtying, especially around the cowling and the wing fairing, which seems to show up quite conspicuously on drawings. All this has been done with oil paints. The underside, you can see there's like a panel there that's been darkened with oil paint. That's again just looking at pictures and several different applications to represent that very heavily oil stained and streaked belly there. That's had 2 applications with a coat of varnish in between just to seal the first coat before applying the second. So that's pretty much where we are. So there's a chipping on the wing roots, washing. So far we've used, you know, pretty much all of the usual, shall we say, tools in the armoury. The paint has faded and weathered as I was painting. There's been a gloss wash. There's been oil paint streaking, oil paint and using oil paints both as a dry brush to create some very fine cordite stains coming back from the gun positions and the shell ejector chutes. One thing to bear in mind is if you look at pictures, these cordite stains coming back from leading edges of wings and stuff tend to be a lot more subtle than people think they are. They're not nearly as heavy in general, so just go a bit careful with those, and less is more in that case. So now we're on to this stage now where all that's pretty much dry, and what I want to do is apply some exhaust stains and stuff. Now looking at pictures like on here, let's get that Spitfire out of the way for a second. So looking at pictures that came with the instructions, the actual sort of exhaust stains, if I look at this, which is actually the subject I'm doing, there are exhaust stains coming back, but they're not actually massively heavy, and they certainly don't show any of the sort of pale white, sort of whitey grey sort of lead deposits that you would normally see. And it's the same with this one. Hopefully you can see that there is definitely an exhaust stain there, just not as heavy as one might suspect. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to represent that, and we're going to be using Tamiya acrylics for that. And the mixture I like to use for exhaust stains, for the darker exhaust stains, is a mixture of XF1 flat black and XF64 red brown. It just gives it that kind of it kind of takes the edge off the black and gives it that kind of dirty appearance. So I've mixed up a batch of it in here and thinned it with a lot of isopropyl alcohol, and I've loaded the airbrush up. So what we're going to do is just see what, so just take anything to test. So the airbrush has been loaded up with this thinned mixture of red, brown and black, and we're ready to start. So what I'm going to do, so you can see that coming through already. Now the pressure I'm using here is higher than a lot of people tend to use. I tend to find if you reduce the pressure on Tamiya acrylics too much, you'll end up with a splattery, bitty sort of finish. So what I want is quite a high pressure. Even though the paint is very highly thinned, I still want it to atomize well, because if it doesn't atomize well, it'll just look like quite a splotchy sort of finish. That does mean that if you're not careful, you can end up applying a lot too much So it's just about finding really, I'm not looking for much more than that on each side. It's really a very quick process to apply. So check the shape of the pattern as well. You'll find it generally tends to arc down just a little bit, but not much. But really, looking at photographs, I don't really want to do too much more than that. You can, if you like. One of the things you can do is quite often these finishes got some scratches and stuff on them, so just using a wooden toothpick, you can just go around and just do some minor sort of scratches. Tend to go in quite a vertical pattern for these scratches. Just a few. And also there's some on the underside here, just helping with those streaks. But less is definitely more. Work very, very gently on here, because if you apply too much, you'll end up with a very dark, very obtrusive area, which is not pretty much not what we want. So that is. You can work over other panel lines if you like. I am actually going to leave this pretty much here. I'm pretty happy with the with what I've achieved. And so at this point, what's going to happen is I've got to add things like the mirror, the aerial wire, the pitot on the underside, which goes in there, and just sort of touch all those in, pop the prop on. And we are basically done with this with this Kotare Spitfire 5B. So I'll stop the video here, and we'll come back and hopefully show you some sort of reveal photos, and I'll have a quick chat then. So here's a few pictures of the finished model, which will be on display at Scale Model World 2025 on the Kotare stand. So if anybody fancies popping along there, having a chat, having a look at the models, you would be most welcome. Hope to see you at Scale Model World next weekend. This is a beautiful model and highly recommended if 32nd scale Spitfires are your thing. So enjoy, and thanks very much everybody for tuning in, and I will see you with the next project, which is yet to be determined. So thanks all, take care, and I'll see you soon.